Thank you, Bella, for your detailed introduction, and thank you for organizing this symposium and inviting us all to discuss our current practice and see how we get to a next level. You already told a little bit. LIMA is a very young organization. We started in 1913, but we have quite a long history coming from Montevideo, time-based arts, the Netherlands Media Art Institute, somebody also knows as NIMC, and these institutes were pioneers in the field of production and presentation and preservation of media art. And highly respected LIMA continued their collection and the preservation and research work, so also part of the knowledge and part of the network. And I would like to start my presentation a little bit about talking about the notion of media art. Although I'm not an art historian, I yesterday missed a little bit the notion of media art, all these different forms, all these different platforms, all these different approaches. And this really wide variety of examples. So you can see the media art is often related to technique, is often related to process, is often related to the mass media, and so on. And there is a whole interdisciplinary part of it. Most of you, if you're art historian, do know far more than I about all these different genres. And I just also want to take the opportunity to tell a little bit about the Dutch media art history, starting with Dick Rijmakers. Dick Rijmakers worked at the NAT Lab, and that was the Philips Development Lab, where he worked a lot with sound, and he made a lot of installations, based sound installations, and a lot of other work. This was in the early 60s. Then from late 60s, early 70s, all the events and happenings took place and were recorded. One of the first initiatives in the Netherlands was Lijnbaancentrum in Rotterdam. That was also presenting this video tent at Sonsbeek buiten de Perken, and where the audience and the artists could come and use equipment. And we all know, but sometimes it's really strange to realize that at that time, this equipment was extremely rare, extremely expensive, and extremely big comparing to the current days. You see some happenings, Jan van der Heijden, and downstairs the Basjan Ader work, I'm too sad to tell you. The other genre or the other works in our collection that we have are based on the archive of Livinus van der Bunt. Actually, René Coelho, the founder of Montevideo, was inspired by Livinus van der Bunt. He made compositions and related with slides and with video and images and huge installations as well. As in many countries, in the Netherlands also late 60s, early 70s, the first presentations on the broadcast, on the television, were made by artists. So at that time, hardly any artist was called a media artist or video artist. But there were many contemporary artists that made a media work. Jan Múzeum is a very conceptual artist. And then, let's say, mid-80s, early 80s, the more installation works, the multiple screen works, the works that were not longer one screen, but more like objects in the room with all kinds of video content. And it's also very hard to remember or to think of that at that time seeing yourself on a screen was something incredible. Now it's very common. Although at that time they also worked with all these closed circuits, camera circuits. They worked with all this equipment that was also used for surveillance and so on. These are very old examples, but of course there are many, 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 many new. Just an overview of some installations we distribute or we produced or we preserved. A work by A Revolution by Jeffrey Shaw and Tjebbe van Tijen, work by Daan Rozengaarde, Duin, Marnix de Nijs, with a particular interfacing, and De Geuze. That's a net art piece. And of course, using different interfaces. Also, we have also many pieces where there is an embodiment. This is more related to performances. And this is one we produced, but is also in the Ars Electronica collection, or a lot of documentation is in the Ars Electronica collection because it's one of the prizes at the Ars Electronica. Sonja Cilari. Of course, I could go on for quite a while because we have many, many, many artworks in collection, and many institutions outsource the caretaking of their collections to us. Hannah is smiling, she knows the work as well as I do. And I could show you far more examples, but I think the main question today and often in preservation is like how to keep all these works accessible for the future. Because we have to be honest and we have to say, we have to face that there are more media artworks produced than ever. This changing technology is rapid and will continue ever. But we also need the visibility and the access to all these works for our cultural heritage, for students, for the artists, for all of us. So we need research, we need representation, we need, let's say, reuse. There is this need of registration, documentation, preservation methods, and also this need of knowledge. Who knows? Who has this knowledge? Can we share it? How to get there? And I'm not going into one particular research project. I'm going to try to show what it brought us, all these research projects. So let's see if I've succeeded. Some things changed over the last 20 years in media art preservation, but I think one of the key questions, what are the essential elements that you want to keep to preserve the integrity into the future? That question is still valid. And how to determine this origin and this authenticity of the work, these are questions not only asked for media art, but for media art, they're still very valid. Documentation is key. Often the museums have a practice in doing artist interviews to be aware of like the behavior of the work for the future, to see what the parameters will be, how the artists think, how to deal with the work. But with any documentation, also with this artist interview, it's always the question, how much information can you gather and how can you have access to all this information also for the future. The same with this wonderful 3D or VR models, how to sustain these models. So, and how to look at it, how to interpret it in the future, and how to capture these works. As a distributor, we are used to present works worldwide. So we are very aware and very knowledgeable about documenting a work, because we need installation instructions and all kinds of instructions to present the works all over the world. So for instance, the II installation that was made especially for the Montevideo new building, of course we did a lot of research on that one and made installation instructions. We have a database, and this is the shield of the Sonia Cillari piece, I think, where you can see how we list the data. Here we have the content descriptions, the files, but then all files, and also the documentation. And then online we have video documentation most of the time. If you go to our online catalog, all the audience can see just a small clip due to copyright reasons, and the description. But if you're doing research or if you're doing making a program, then you can get a login and have access to the full length of the work. And then when you want to use the work for a professional presentation, then you have to phone or you have to email us, and we discuss how it needs to be presented. We use this kind of model for documentation. It has different layers. So it has a work description, the manifestation descriptions, and the different items and expressions in between. It's very layered, and we needed it because there are so many different, let's say, carriers of the work. Look at the most of the works. We have the artistic master, we have an archival master, we have probably an analog Betacam, a digital Betacam, an AVI file, MPEG-2 file, MPEG-4 file. Could be that we have a subtitled version in Spanish, a subtitled version in Dutch. Could be that we would have different aspect ratios. For sure we will have stills and documentation, and to keep that all in shape and together, we use this model next to the metadata. Over the years, we did many tape preservation projects. I started late 80s at Montevideo, and then they say, oh, now it's the digital. Now we don't do anything analog anymore. Digital time has started. At that time, they already, with quite some institutions in the Netherlands, they already did a preservation phase, we call it, where they transferred a lot of open reel tapes to analog Betacam. And they rescued as much as possible at that time. But then already they were aware that within 7 to 10 years a new transfer should take place. So then I was in charge, and then at that time we selected digital Betacam. We made a bigger selection of the works we preserved. For instance, there were quite some works, same works, in several collections. For instance, all kinds of performance documentation or editions. So we decided to preserve the technical best quality only once, and then share this with the museums. We also thought about all these interviews that were preserved in the first phase, not to continue that on this high quality. Now we regret it. Now we would do it because at that time there was this real strict barrier or border between documentation and the artwork, where now that's far more fluent. But of course there was a variety of manifestations, and I'll give my favorite example, and I won't show you the work, but it's a well-known performance registration, and there are so many versions. There are versions, there's a film version, there are video versions, there are multiple camera versions, there are versions with German subtitling or credits, and there are even versions that have a spectacular different ending, like this one where Marina is kicked by someone from the audience. It's not the best slide ever, but here you see the diversity of different manifestations. And I'm not even included all the documentation versions and the collected works versions and so on. Just to give you an impression about that it's not one thing, that there is a variety. And not only on carriers, but also in the way you can present it. Nowadays, the artists want to have it presented like this, like an installation, a projection. And at the catalog, online catalog, you can see it like this, the different versions. And then in the description in our collection information system, this is just one. I must say, I cannot even read it here, but you can read it there. It's the film version, I guess, but I cannot read it. So we did, I think, 3 phases of video art preservation, to analog Betacam, to digital Betacam, and nowadays to uncompressed AVI. So all the analog video material now is preserved to digital AVI. And the digital video material that comes in stays in its own codec. Next to the projects, we did, as I told you, we did it in cooperation with the Foundation for the Conservation of Contemporary Art and in cooperation with museums and academies and festivals in the Netherlands. Of course, we also, after the tape preservation, started with projects about equipment preservation and installation preservation. This is an example from a work produced by Montevideo, but in the state collection nowadays, and there are also some versions, and the work, and many of these are researched in the obsolete equipment project in cooperation with PACT, in cooperation with some Dutch museums and with some Belgian museums, and where some experts helped us to draw the lines and the instructions. And of course, there were many more installation projects. One of the first was the Oasis project, where we worked together with C3 on. We worked at that time at the installations of the Bazookas. We had the 404 project, 404 object not found project, I should say, where we worked on installations of Stensfield and Hoyka's. And we also worked together with I forgot the amount of partners, but I think around 30 partners in the Insight Installation project, where vocabulary and guidelines and a documentation model for complex installations, not necessarily media installations, was developed. And what we did, we looked at that time at emulation as preservation strategy. I didn't make a list, but I can send Bella probably has the list. Otherwise, I can send them a list with the links to all these projects. You can find a lot of information online. I can send it to you. Currently, we are working on works of Peter Struiken. He's a well-known artist in the Netherlands, I guess. He's one of our digital pioneers, late 70s. He made many computer-based works, and he's also he's also a designer, and he made a lot of works in public space and architectural surroundings. And also this is a project we do with some museums, because these works are in the museum collections in the Netherlands, together with the Foundation for the Conservation of Contemporary Art. And then I see we have this famous model again, for the third time at this conference. Yeah, what shall I say about the model? It's a reference model. So it's not an instruction how to do things, but it gives you a certain vocabulary so you can understand each other a little bit more. This model, the OASIS, Open Archive Information System model, is used by libraries and by archives. So we try to work this way also, so we can connect and we can communicate with this community. And we also organized our repository for media art like this. There is a phase before it gets into this repository or in this model, the pre-ingest phase, we call it. This is like producing the work and checking the quality, technical quality of the work, if it's complete, if it's the highest quality possible. If not, go back to the artist and ask for it and then insert it in the system. It's about planning, it's about making these archival information packages where you keep all the different layers of the artwork together, and at the end it's also about access. I'll see if I can give a more concrete example. We have such a digital repository, and in the Netherlands 25 collections are using it, academies, but basically museums and private collectors. I have some slides about the workflow for the repository, and they are not fully translated yet, but I hope to give you an impression how we think about it and what the workflow is. Of course, the museums are in charge of the purchase contracts and the documentation, the artist interview, and then LIMA supports them with checklists and technical questions you can ask, what format to buy, how to document it, things like that. We also make checklists, and then at a certain moment that information comes to LIMA and comes in our workflow, where we then start doing the quality check and the validation of the technical material. So we don't. We have our own collection. That's the distribution collection. Of course, there we select what comes in, and but of course, all the collections we take care of. We are not the selector. The museum or the academy hands the work over to us or outsource the maintenance to us. Then, of course, there is a whole layer of information we want to gather and checkups to make. As you probably see, there is there's a diversity of type of works, digital born, more installation, or more video-based work. And actually, it's never perfect, or for sure it's not perfect yet, but we are on our way to make also like a workflow how to deal with it. And also quite some questions are asked about emulation, but also about the parameters, if the artist would deliver the source code, what we could do with it, who can execute the work, and so on. It's a little bit boring probably, but that when a work is inserted, then we have these sheets that are filled in, and they're more complex, but this is just an extraction to give you an idea. Many works we made make ISO fields and or ISOs, and we look at the different parameters and document it, and then again in this documentation system. The slides will be shared, I guess, so we will see it soon. And of course we do emulations and check them. And then in this particular case, we have a look on how to give access to it in the future, and we selected for many reasons this player, and for storage, we basically use LTO tapes and the rest of the materials at the server. If media art would be one object, solid, no change, then this would be a perfect solution. But as Christine already told, there are many, many, many layers, and there are many, many changes needed all over time. This is with digital art. They have many manifestations. A net art piece presented in an exhibition could look totally different, for instance, or artists over time develop the works furthermore. But this is nothing new, huh? If you think about this, all these versions that are existing. I'll have to run in a way because I wanted to tell you so much. I'll soon stop, but I wanted to highlight also we do like storing, we do transferring, we do emulation, and recently we also started with do reconstruction, or better reinterpretation, and inviting artists to make works on the base of other works by other artists. Also because we think that's a way to mediate the work. There were 10 specialists asked about these are 10 tips from 10 specialists about how to face the preservation challenges. One thing's already yesterday also told, there is so much out there, use it. One of the projects we were working on was the DCA project, Digitizing Contemporary Art. There is a wiki out there in many languages, so hopefully you can find some information there. And the motto for LIMA often is collaboration, because we think that in mapping out these important aspects, you only can do that in a multidisciplinary network where artists and documentalists and others are organized and see to get it on another level. And I think the libraries and the archives did it far better than the museums until now, so I think there is an extra push needed. This is the last slide. My email is there, but if you have very technical questions, then you rather ask one of my colleagues, and slides will be shared, so you have their email addresses. Thank you.